So hello everyone, welcome to the short announcement or short announced live stream here due to the special weather situation we've had today regarding the storm called Zeynep. I think that's how you pronounce it, Zeynep. I haven't really heard it on news being pronounced, but I think that's how I would pronounce it. Kazupaya, hello to you. MCK, hello to you as well. Lilo Pilot, hello, how you all doing? So let me just see if that all works. There we go. Right, Agent B, hello, and Tefre, hello to you as well. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so we're just bracing really here in northern Germany. We're just bracing for today's storm. So a couple of days ago, we already had a pretty hefty storm with some damages here in the north. Actually, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the complete railway system in North Germany broke down for I don't know, for half a day or something. Yeah, causing huge upsets. But the weird thing is that tonight's storm will be even worse. So that's going to be interesting to see how that's going to pan out this afternoon, or yeah, pretty much noontime. Hey Mark, how you doing? Nice to see you. And DGM, hello to you as well. So this afternoon, the storm hit the UK and especially the southern area. So London Heathrow was definitely one of those airports hit very hard, and a chap called who has got the YouTube channel Big Jets TV has actually live streamed again from London Heathrow 27 left. And now I'm not allowed to show any footage from that, but I watched it for about almost 2 hours, I think, preparing for today's stream, and I was well fascinated. I was fascinated by what was going on there, and I could feel the anxieties of the passengers. I could feel the extreme concentration, you know, by the pilots, and so yeah, that was intense. I have to admit, even watching it, not even flying, but just watching it. You watched it as well. I think it was almost 200,000 people at some point watched his stream. So absolutely incredible. So the interest was huge, obviously. Right. So now, guys, the thing is, I'm not going to try to simulate the exact conditions here in Microsoft for a very simple reason, because Microsoft is terrible in simulating real-world weather and wind gusts and so on. So let's not start any of these discussions, because I'm going to start bashing Microsoft again. I've already had a fit again last night when I tried engine failure again, and it's still bugged, meaning that you fail one engine, it does not yaw. I mean, like, how can you develop a flight sim or call it a flight sim, and it doesn't even simulate your moment when you fail an engine? Like, seriously. Okay, let's not go there. All right, I was promised I'm not going to start raging. Got to pull myself together. But anyways, so we'll talk about, in general, about strong wind operation, what it means for the pilots, what it means with pre-planning, then actually during the flight. And I'm going to talk about some comments the gentleman on Big Jets TV made regarding from, you know, the landing aircraft, or, you know, apparently the pilots you know, not being so capable compared to those are capable, etc., etc. I'll try to demystify that a bit, because what he was saying was a little bit well, a little bit off the truth. So yeah. Exactly. Don't get me started. Otherwise, you've got to be kidding me. But anyways, hey, Gregor, hey, how are you doing? Yeah, so obviously there are things we consider pre-planning wise. So even before we get into the aircraft or before we order fuel, there's so much stuff to consider. So as you can see here, the windsock, it's fully horizontal, and it shows you that it's got, was it more than 30 knots? 25 knots? I can't remember. But if you look at the live weather right now, it still has 26 gusts, 38. And this afternoon when I was watching the live stream, it had gusts up to 53 knots. So I've also prepared a little workshop, well, not workshop file, but a little PDF file for the A320nx Microsoft version, so the fly-by-wire version, regarding some of the limitations, because I remember that we got some repeated questions regarding whether or not there was a limitation for headwind component. And there is, but not for manual flying. It's only for auto landing. I'll cover that as well. All right, so pre-planning, obviously, you have to find an alternate airport that is within limitations. And limitation-wise, things like landing distance available has to be considered. Obviously, weather with RVRs has to be considered. And also, the wind limitation has to be considered. So as long as you have airports with a forecasted wind of more than 35 knots or 38 knots, whatever the operator's limitation is regarding crosswind, that airport is either considered below, if you want to have that as a destination airport, or if it's the alternate airport, then of course it's also considered below. If the destination airport is already below, i.e. London Heathrow today would have been probably for some operators below limitations, so above limitations, and so they would have had to have two alternate airports anyways. Now, if you looked at the planning, the situation was such that pretty much all airports in the UK at that point were not suitable because of the wind situation. The same goes for, hey Brennelt, and JD, hello, Lee, hello to you. And so it was a lot of consideration going into the pre-planning, obviously. And I saw one flight, for example, going from Munich to London. They actually went around and they returned all the way back to Munich. We talked about this the other stream. It's not unusual because the airline may want to have the aircraft back at its home base so that it can continue further on its normal rotations later on. Because an aircraft doesn't only do 2 flights a day, it can sometimes do up to 8 flights a day, or maybe some 10 flights a day, whatever the leg length is. So that's why it went all the way back to Munich, meaning pre-planning wise, you would have to consider that with the fuel. So you would get your dispatcher and tell him, hey, for today's flight, do me a favor and calculate Munich as my alternate airport. And then on top of that, you would then want to put some more fuel, because we know that when you return to your airport, your departure airport, so that's considered the alternate airport, if you don't take any extra fuel, you will arrive with the final reserve fuel. So the idea then is, of course, to make sure that you take a, I don't know, half an hour, 45-minute extra fuel available as well, so that you have at least 45 to 1 hour remaining flight time when you return to your departure airport. Yes, so JD, we talked about it at this beginning of the stream, so you joined probably a little bit later. So that's what I was referring to, because I was watching that as well this afternoon, and I was fascinated by that as well. Hey, V. Chris. So yes, of course. Yeah, I thought, that's a good topic to cover again. And V. Chris, you're right. Yep. The storm, or last storm, lot from Krakow to Warsaw landed in Budapest. Isn't that incredible, right? Yeah, so sometimes it can take some really weird forms regarding these alternate airports. I've had flights, I've had storms in my life, especially the short range. I've had, I don't know how many storms, extreme storms I've had. It must be at least 5, like today, for example. And so whenever I have that situation, the first thing I do is I take my time with pre-planning. So mostly you will have a slot time anyways. Let's say, for example, London Heathrow, I'm pretty sure they would have at least an hour slot delay. So you should have enough time to do a proper preparation, right? You will not be stressed, right, because of the schedule. Yeah, hey Danny, the tap didn't have a good day. Yeah, I mean, the weird thing was, again, I saw so many go-arounds. It felt like at some point there were more go-arounds than landings in Heathrow. Sammy, no. So Sammy, I'm not here to fly and show you how good I can handle the absolutely degraded and not realistic gust simulation here in Microsoft. No, that's not. I'm just here to talk about the topic of strong wind operations. I mean, I've had enough streams where, well, we had some crazy weather, and if I were to demonstrate the technique of landing and crosswind, etc., or strong winds, I would take the X-Plane 11 for that. So yeah, again, Microsoft Flight Sim is just so behind regarding the simulation of the weather. So yeah, it doesn't make sense to even start, using Microsoft Flight Sim for that simulation. So pre-planning, yeah, you would make sure you have enough fuel. Fuel is something that will help you in good decision making later on. We know of the saying haste makes waste. So whenever you have a time problem, and i.e. not enough fuel in your tanks, then a decision is based on the first available airport, so the first available decision or solution, and not the best solution or the safest solution. So having time in your tanks, i.e. enough fuel in your tanks, helps you to make a good decision in flight. These days, exactly, so MCK, these days, when you have, I mean, we're talking about, if I look back on over 10 years of flying, or let's say 10 years of flying the A320s alone, I've had, let's say, 5 of these extreme weather days with extreme winds. I take an enormous amount of fuel. Right, I make sure that I have a good alternate, which could be, I don't know, up to an hour 30, 2 hours from my destination if necessary. And also I would just have, maybe an hour 30 extra fuel on board as a buffer. This is not the situation. So these weather situations is not the situation, and it's not the day to think about saving fuel. Right? You do that on all the other days and all the other flights where you try to be as economical as possible. But if you have to fly in these conditions, man, you just take fuel. That's something that will help you in making good decisions in flight. Anything else, in my opinion, is dangerous. Shouldn't be done. Yeah, give an example. The last biggest storm I've had was Frankfurt, Amsterdam. Amsterdam having winds up to 55 knots. The good thing in Amsterdam is obviously because of the amount of runways they have, you can be sure that you'll get one runway with headwind component, or mostly headwind component. So that way, you're not really facing a strong crosswind landing, and that helps obviously. Nevertheless, you have the wind shear potential, and I'm sure that a lot of aircraft today going into London Heathrow, they faced wind shear warnings. So either a reactive wind shear system warning from the GPWS system. Wow, I can feel my house shake right now. It is that windy. I just felt a wind gust, and I'm sitting right up below the roof. I'm not kidding you. I felt the house shake there. Crazy. So the reactive wind shear system, obviously, yeah, gust 40 now at Bremen Airport, and 65 later on. Good God. So the reactive wind shear system, which takes into account accelerations and wind or speed changes, will then issue a wind shear warning, which you'll then follow, obviously. And if you have a new aircraft with a predicted wind shear, then you may get a wind shear warning a lot earlier on. Because I heard that, what was his name? Mr. Dyer. Okay, so Mr. Dyer, he was kind of wondering why some aircraft were commenting that, oh, he's already gone around. That could be simply because the aircraft involved had a predicted wind shear, while the one in front didn't have that system, or didn't have a predicted wind shear, and actually had a reactive wind shear, so much later. Or the pilot decided that the approach is unstable and did a go around. Yeah, so, and of course, just as a quick kind of technical instruction, the predicted wind shear system here in the A320 series, if it's installed, needs a working weather radar system, obviously, and it needs precipitation. So only if you have raindrops moving vertically will you then be able to get a predicted wind shear warning. All right, that's necessary. So in dry weather conditions, you will not get a predicted wind shear warning. That only works with the weather radar system. However, the reactive wind shear system solely relies on your GPWS system. Again, it takes into account things like descent rate, accelerations, speed changes, etc., and then gives out a reactive wind shear. So yeah, so some aircraft went around very early on, and some just prior touchdown. I saw a TAP 321, I think it was, or 320, and it literally went around about 5 feet above the ground. So that can happen as well. So, anytime the pilot says, it's just not safe, it's not stable, they will go around. Some questions coming in, thank you much. So please use the ask, !ask command. Brennald, what happens to the passengers when the aircraft do the full return? Well, Brennald, it depends on the operator. So if you fly with Ryanair, well, that's tough luck, I would guess. You would be left alone. You would not get another flight. You just tough luck. You had a bad day, I would think. If you fly with a larger airline that has a different contracts, ticket contracts, etc., then you would get a rebooking. I know that my company would also offer free hotel accommodation. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the airline. What happens with the passengers? Hey, Avenger, yeah, wind shear, exactly. So today we talk about London Heathrow, especially today. So Big Jet TV was live streaming today, and that was extremely interesting to watch those aircraft land. Yeah, another comment. Oh, let me just finish answering the questions first of all. It is more difficult to land a smaller jet during these conditions. Moving mass on heavy jets seems more stable. On the show, it seemed the bigger jets were calmer on final. Yeah, JD, that is obviously something that has to do with inertia. So, a certain mass going through or having a certain direction in motion will require a larger force acting on it to make it change direction. Right? Physically, very simple to explain. So yes, indeed, I can tell you that from flying the 747, that wind gusts in general will be less effective on a larger jet. However, it doesn't mean that the landing itself becomes easier. And the reason being is that if you look at the rudder of a 747 or an A380 and the arm from the center. Hey, Zeynep, how you doing? You can imagine that wind gusts hitting the tail of the aircraft will have quite an enormous amount of leverage on the turning point. So strong crosswind for big jets is still a challenge. It's just that the motion So the lateral motion, right, any wind gusts hitting the aircraft will not offset it that much, or not have such an impact on changing the path itself. But the yaw moment, let's say, that the crosswind gusts act on the big jets is quite big. So again, it is challenging still to fly these bigger jets. Sammy, usually disregard wind. How short a flight does it need to be to return to the... well, Sammy, of course. I mean, the options you have depend, of course, on several factors, like how heavy is your aircraft? What's your max landing weight? So obviously, if you have a lot of passengers and cargo on board, well, then your possible extra fuel gets less, right? A longer flight will mean you burn more fuel on your way to your destination, but then you don't have the fuel to go all the way back to destination, to your departure airport. So again, it's always a mixture between these, weights, limitations, wind situation, etc. Of course, you cannot always go back to your departure airport. That is not always the case. The truck driving in front of me had a wind shear warning. I can imagine. Yeah, driving trucks in these conditions must be terrible as well. Hello, Geep. How are you doing? Geep, you've asked, how far from the centerline will an aircraft land before go-around? Well, Geep, it's a good question. It's not only how far it's off the centerline, it's also a question of what's its relative motion away from the centerline. Right? So again, there are several factors that you have to consider. It's just, again, it's not only one variable that makes the decision. Sometimes it does, but mostly it's several different factors that then go into that decision to go around. Mr. What was it, Devi? Or what's his name again? Mr. Dyer. So sorry, Mr. Dyer. He commented also a little bit on so you have these talented pilots, and then you have those normal pilots. No. Well, yeah, in certain regards, yes. Of course, you have a minimum level of talent that you have to have, right, to fly an airliner and to pass your check rights, including these crosswind situations. You have to prove your capability, right? No doubt. However, experience plays into that, and I think, Mark, experience on the aircraft type involved definitely means or makes a difference in several parts. If you are, and I can relate to myself. So when I was checked out on the A320 series in 2012, I had my first extreme weather situation about half a year after my transition. So after half a year after I've passed my checkout on the A320, I had my first day. I will never forget that. We're flying to Berlin, Tegel at that time, and it was the last it was the last two flights of a 5-day rotation, and it was evening, and I looked at the weather forecasts early morning already, but later on in the day I knew what was approaching, and I was actually thinking that my flight would be cancelled because having, again, an estimated wind, so forecast of 60 knots or more, I thought never ever will I have to fly those two legs. And so we arrived from the airport in Europe in Frankfurt, and we prepared the aircraft, and I got a phone call first of all saying, well, we're going to have to pull off your first officer. You get a new one from standby, which I disliked because I already knew that co-pilot. We've flown together 5 days on that rotation. He was a very capable co-pilot. I had full trust in him. Hey, Luke. So getting a completely fresh first officer just for those 2 last legs with that extreme wind, I was a bit unhappy about that. But my ops center said there's no other option. Live with it. All right. I live with it. So new co-pilot comes along. He was a nice chap. We had a slot time an hour late. So I discussed the fuel situation with him, the weather situation with him. And so we decided not on, I think Dresden was the first alternate airport, and we actually decided on Leipzig first of all, because Leipzig had headwind and I think only gusts 30 or something, so not so extreme. At that time, I heard that they were starting, hey Bruno, I should say Broody, but hey Bruno. Oh, that name. I heard them starting with cancellations. So Hamburg, Bremen, they cancelled that, and so I was actually expecting that Berlin would be cancelled as well. But at the moment, from planning, nothing was happening, no cancellations regarding Berlin. So we planned, we had passengers boarding, and that's another thing. People always wonder, hey, if you have a slot time that's an hour later, why do you have your passengers board on time? That doesn't make sense. I understand the frustration from the passenger point of view. I totally understand that. However, be aware that slot times can change. And the thing is this. If you want to call in to ATC and say, we have a slot time in a 1 hour time, but we are fully ready now, meaning all passengers on board, all doors closed, please send a ready message to ATC, and that way you can hope for an improvement of your slot time. And that does happen sometimes. You cannot call in to ATC and say that you're ready if your passengers aren't on board. So again, I fully understand the frustration from passenger point of view, having to sit on board for an hour or potentially more in those very uncomfortable seats when you have that kind of slot time. But that's just the way it is, right? So there's always hope for improvement. So while we were waiting, so we fueled up the aircraft. We had destination Leipzig, but we had some extra fuel as well, but we didn't have the fuel to return to Frankfurt. So while we were waiting with the passengers on board, I got a phone call from Ops Center saying, they asked me, what alternate did you plan? And I knew exactly what they were up to. And I said, well, if you are questioning whether or not I refueled or I fueled up all the way to come back to Frankfurt, I have to disappoint you. I didn't do that. Right? Our alternate right now is Leipzig. And he was like, that's a shame, because we've already got 2 aircraft diverting out of Berlin right now. And so they're going to Dresden, and it would be better for operations if we were able to bring the aircraft back to Frankfurt in case we can't land in Berlin. So I said, well, I mean, we've gotten slot time in about 45 minutes time. If you want, I can call the fueler. I can fuel up to return to Frankfurt. It's weight-wise, it's all fine. We can do that. And so they said, oh yeah, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. All right, so I called dispatch, said, hey, need replanning, alternate Frankfurt, I need the fuel value for that, etc., etc. And yeah, so we got a new flight plan, we called the fueler, the fuel truck came, we switched off the seatbelt signs, made an announcement that we'll be fueling while the passengers on board, blah, 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 did all the preparations, all the requirements to have that happening, etc., etc. So we fueled up the aircraft again. And the slot time didn't improve, so we pretty much departed at the time that the slot time started. So we departed going towards Berlin, and I can tell you that, again, I was only checked out for half a year. I was already a captain for about 5 years at that time, but I was completely new on the A320 series. So my real-world experience with this flight stick and the flight control computers acting in these extreme wind conditions were, well, little. Right, so I was a bit anxious. I'm not going to lie. I was somewhat anxious about how I would be able to manage it. My co-pilot, on the other hand, He was already, I think, 6 or 7 years on the A320, so he had lots of experience. Now the question to you, who would you think would be better off flying the approach? And while you think about that question, type the answer here in what you think here in chat, please. I will have a look about some questions. Lilo Pilot, thoughts on the 787 diverting to Zurich? Well, again, Lilo Pilot, again, it's about the safest option in that case. So they decided that all the other airports didn't have the ability to cater for a safe landing, and so they for that plan B, they decided that they will go to Zurich. How much are you allowed to delay a flight just so the weather can improve? I can't, Sammy. I'm not allowed personally. I'm not really allowed to delay a flight. I would have to coordinate that with Ops Center. And so if I talk to them, they may agree with me, but I cannot delay a flight just simply on my own. The autopilot. Right, autopilot I can answer very quickly. Let's have a look. There's a limitation, believe it or not, for headwind component, not for manual flying. Manual flying, there is no limit for headwind. However, for autoland, for the Neo 320, and again, that depends on the aircraft type. Neo 321 only has 15 knots headwind component, maximum headwind component for Cat 2-3 automatic landing. So the automatic landing headwind component limit is 30 knots on the 320 Neo series. So for the wind we had in Berlin, autoland was definitely not possible. Right, FO. Exactly. So the FO would be the logical option, wouldn't it? However, there is a rule, a regulation that we have, and that is if a landing is somewhat critical, the captain has to do the landing. And it's up to the captain then to rule on when he thinks it's a critical landing. All right. So the strong winds obviously is not really what I would call strictly extremely critical, but it definitely goes into that category. And if something happens, a investigating board would then ask me, captain, you saw the wind, that was quite a critical wind situation, why did you not fly? And I would argue, well, you know, I have less experience with the co-pilot regarding the aircraft type. And then the answer would be, well, but you are fully trained. That is no excuse. Right? So, yeah, so of course I would have to do landing in Berlin. But I will give you another reason why I think that's actually the better option. And I'll tell you why. If I leave the first officer to hand fly the aircraft, what do you think his physical state will be while performing that landing? I mean, he's capable, yes. You know, he's really, really experienced, he's capable. But what do you think about his concentration, his focus? Yeah, Maestro, exactly. For me, having not the experience on the aircraft type at that time, on, you know, how it reacts, A, B, the first officer may be so focused on trying to control the aircraft that he's completely tunnel visioned on his instruments, and I can't see his stick inputs. Right, it was dark, so I can't kind of glance over and see what he's doing with his side stick. It's not linked. Right, so that's the issue here. I have literally no control. So not even verbally, I can call out speed changes, or, you know, if there's any limitations being busted, I can call out things, but I don't know his state. I don't know his, you know, how also the hearing, that's something, right? So the hearing, yeah, exactly. Brown pants situation, right? So his hearing is likely to be one of the first things to go if you have a tunnel vision, right? So that's something to consider as well sometimes. But that's more in the very extreme cases, not necessarily in this case. But let's think about the other way around. If I'm pilot flying, right, I'm flying. I'm steering the aircraft. So I'm fulfilling the rule that it's a critical landing. Captain performing the landing. So that's ticked. Right. That's affirmed. My first officer is not so tunnel visioned. He's actually got a very good ability then to monitor all of the situation, all of the speed changes, altitude changes, deviation from glide slope, localizer, etc., etc. And with his experience, he can do the good call-outs, and he can say, "Hey, Captain, I think you should do this, or maybe you consider this." Right? He's got more capacity with his with a lower level of workload. So definitely, he's going to be a huge backup for me. So that's why in this constellation, yes, for me personally, it's my opinion, it's a much better distribution. If I'm the pilot flying, he as the more experienced pilot on type, he's the pilot monitoring. So yeah, so I was pilot flying, and all was going well to about, let's say, 5,000 feet. So at 5,000 feet, we got radar vectors, and we still had 60 knots wind, or 65 knots wind. The tower called in wind 20 degree off, 30. I know it's about 30 degree off from the southwest, 30 degree off from centerline, and it was gusting 45. And we turned base, and the turbulence started. And I'm not kidding you, it was turbulence. I mean, it was more like going towards severe turbulence. It was not funny. So there already, we started to talk about whether or not it would make sense to even continue right now. So the first officer said, well, how about we wait until we switch to tower and maybe get a tower wind report again and a pilot report from an aircraft landing to see how it will be developing further down the road. And I said, well, good idea. It's a good input. So we went and did the intercept, and on final, it was still above 50 knots wind we had. So I selected speed, right, activate the approach phase, we went flaps 1, and then the trouble already started because the wind changes or the speed changes were so big that we had problems. It was a 321 as well. So we had issues with placket speeds or VFE speeds. So I had to go like 5 knots below the S speed to get to flaps 2 and so on. Then one of the very weird things about the 320 showed itself, and that was I was flying selected speed, and so I was flying like 150 knots, right? So I think, or 160 knots maybe. So the approach was like 135 in that region, or maybe it was even 140 because we're doing a config 3 landing because of wind shear potential, and I remember going to manage speed because the manage speed function is a very nice deal regarding the target speed changing depending on the wind gusts. And so there's no big requirement for thrust changes if there's a short-term change in speed, wind speed. And so I pressed on that speed button to get managed speed, and the speed bug, I'm not joking, went from I think we were about 150 or something. It jumped from 150 to about 175 because of that headwind component we had. And so the first officer, he said, speed. And I looked at him, he was grinning. I thought, yeah, right. and he said, nah, just joking, right? So yeah, I said, yeah, well, we're going to fly managed speed, that's fine. And so we did. We flew managed speed. Oh yeah, and the autopilot, I had to take out the autopilot because it was doing such extreme inputs to try to stay on localizer and glide slope that was getting really uncomfortable for the passengers. So yeah, so manual flight, and just we allowed the aircraft just to bob around a bit more around the glide slope and localizer, and just did a bit smoother inputs. Yeah, so we got down, and the pilot report was that about 500 feet it started to smoothen out a bit, and it was more manageable, and wind gusts up to 45 still, and it was not nice, but again, it was manageable. And that's often the case when you approach, and that's why today, and I know that I think some people were questioning in chat there on Big Jets TV, why the airport doesn't just simply shut down, right? It's dangerous. Why doesn't the airport just stop operations? And the answer is simple. There may be some limitations regarding the airport, but regarding wind limitations, it's dependent on the commander and the commander decision. Hey Neil, how you doing? Hey Max. So it is a weird concept really to think about it, right? You have your limitations, and then on the other side you have your feeling it's getting too dangerous. It's just asking for trouble, right? It's like you know, everyone's just waiting for an accident to happen, and then people will say, you see, I saw that coming. The airport should have been closed. And yes, there will come a point sometimes where the airport does close, but that will take a lot more wind than what we had today in Heathrow. All right. So also, you don't know exactly what kind of limitations the operators have. And I'm always quoting this because very often you hear A320 max crosswind limitation is actually 38 knots. Well, that is correct for a lot of operators, but believe it or not, for our operator, it's 35 knots, including gusts. So that's why you have some operators still able to land, while others may not be allowed to land anymore. And with today's wind gusting 53 out of, I think it was 230, 220, 230. Hey, Motosuva, how are you doing? You can imagine that is exactly at the point where you get outside of these limitations. Again, it's up to the commander to decide if he accepts the approach clearance and if he accepts the landing clearance. And at what point he does the go around. Let me just get through some, lots of questions. Sabi. Oh yeah, I already answered that one. Flight Sim Dad. These streams are extremely refreshing, boss. Yes, normal streams are awesome too. It's just hearing first-hand experiences and discussions from you is something that is always welcome. But I'm very happy to hear that. Yeah, I thought today is like one of those topics, and I want to clear up some of these myths, because obviously on that stream today there were some things being said that's just not simply true. And one of those was obviously having the more talented pilots and the not so talented pilots. Well, yeah, it comes more to experience. Well, talent maybe as well to some point, but I can assure you that any rated pilot has the ability to land a jet in 35 winds crosswind, right? They can do that. I would say there may be some that are more relaxed than others, but apart from that, the reason why some aircraft today did a go around while others didn't comes down mostly to the fact that the wind is not steady all the time. So when you hear gusts, so let's say 33 gust 51, it means the mean wind is 33 knots. However, the gusts can be up to 51 knots. And so if you're unlucky, you will be one of those aircraft that will be hit at 50 feet by one of those 51 knots wind gusts, while the aircraft ahead of you 2 minutes earlier had steady winds of 33 knots. All right, that's just the way it is. That's more often the reason why one aircraft goes around than than the other one. Right, so let me just answer 2 more questions. I'll get back to my story. Does maximum crosswind component increase for wider? No. No, Maestro. The only limitation regarding runway width is the 30-meter runway width. That's where you have wind limitations coming in. But otherwise, wind also is dependent on your runway coefficients. So the if you have a runway coefficient of 5, for example, so that's runway wet, 3 millimeters, 25 knots is your limit. So I think it's between 3. Let me just check. 3 and 6 millimeters. Wow, all those values. I'll get to it in a minute. And so you have, depending on the runway surface condition, you know, wet snow, dry snow, slush, standing water, there will be more and more limitations regarding your crosswind. And ice, right? So dry ice, 5 knots crosswind limitation. So that's literally braking action poor, as we will call that. That is then so there we go. So for example, once you have slush, dry snow, wet snow, frost, you get up to 3 millimeters. That's already 25 knots of crosswind limitation. Then for medium, so 3, that is snow more than 3 millimeters up to 100 millimeters, wet snow up to 30 millimeters, compacted snow, dry snow over compacted snow, slippery when wet conditions. Yeah, so again, you have these different runway coefficients. Then you have different crosswind limitations. Today, with the runway being dry, I think it was wet. I think that's some rain showers. Yeah, limitations were probably 35 because they didn't have standing water. Right. Hey, Adamiko, how you doing? Yeah, Danny, that's it. Again, yeah, luck sometimes regarding the wind gusts. Absolutely, yeah. I can definitely confirm that. B, you wrote, just a speculation, but can it start to smoothen out, be a precursor to an accident because temporary something would make a false feeling? Or no, so B, I mean, it's a good point, B, but for me as a pilot, I would be on the edge anyways until the aircraft has touched down and reached taxi speed. So even after the aircraft has touched down, the spoilers deployed, reversers opening, I'm still under full concentration and ready for any sudden inputs of the, you know, so any wearing of the aircraft. And we saw that today. I think I saw a 777. Was it 350? I think a 350 from Singapore Airlines. I'm not joking. It looked like it was going at a 45-degree angle to the runway when it touched down. It weird. The nose just went 45 degrees to the right. And then you saw full left rudder input, and then the whole aircraft went full left again. I'm sure the passengers in the back, they hit their head. So the ones sitting at the window, they must have hit their head on the wall. That must have been such a movement back then. Yeah. So again, you are at full concentration until you reach taxi speed and you're able to depart off the runway. So at any time, you would not have a false feeling of safety. That just doesn't really occur. Right, back to my story in Berlin. So we came down. It was a handful, and I briefed my first officer, and I said, hey, most likely I'm going to be a bit tunnel visioned. So when you do your call outs, make them loud and make them clear. Right, because my hearing may be a little bit impaired because of that tunnel vision. So make them loud, make them like snappy, right? Speed, right? Altitude, glide slope, localizer, right? Snappy call-outs, very important in that sense. Also, I told him Whenever I deviate from the limitations, make your call outs. Important for the voice recorder, right? That's your insurance, right? Just make sure that you've made the call outs, right? If I mess up, I don't want him to get in trouble, because then the investigator's saying you did not do your call outs correctly, right? Also a very good point in this case. Yeah, and also I said, whenever you feel, with your experience, whenever you feel things are getting out of hand, call go around. Right? So really, we were more like go around minded than landing minded. And we did what we could. And interestingly enough, it was a fight down to 500 feet, and then things suddenly smoothed out a bit. So it was becoming more and more manageable. And very often what you'll find is when you reach the airport perimeter, it smoothens out even more. So 200 feet down, very often the landing becomes a lot more manageable. And you saw that today as well on the stream of that Big Jet 2E stream. Oh, just hearing the sirens. Hang on. Just make sure it's only normal siren. It's a fire siren. It's not... Because in Germany we have a system where there's some siren that then tells you to listen to broadcasts. Yeah, but I think it's just normal fire brigade siren. Yeah, I think that's all right. Good. So, yeah, if you're wondering, so near Bremen right now, we have winds up to, what does it say right now? Winds gusting 43 at the moment, temporary 55, and top speeds to be expected at the moment, forecasts around midnight, 60 knots. So that storm is definitely hitting us hard now. Yeah, so the landing itself was all right. That was not so critical. So in the end, all went well. No, Zeynep. No. Right, so yeah, today we saw a lot of aircraft diverting as well out of London Heathrow. And somebody already wrote Speedbird went all the way to Zurich. It's sometimes a little bit difficult for an outsider to fully understand why they went all the way to Zurich. It's a long ways. Why didn't they land in Paris or whatever? Well, Operations Center has the best knowledge in that case regarding, you know, their passengers, transfer passengers, operation-wise. You know, they make the decision really. So I, as a pilot, so as a captain, I'm always in contact with my operations center. So especially if the diversion is more likely. I'll give you an example. I flew to Salzburg 2 years ago. And they had the potential of wind shear that evening. And so we were already primed for that. And I was in contact with operations center. And we already discussed that in case we can't land in Salzburg, we would not go to Vienna. We would actually go to Linz, because there the passengers can be more easily transferred with a bus to Salzburg. So these decisions are not solely made by the commander. He will be in contact with Operations Center, and then together they will find a optimum solution. Do helicopters have Oh yes, definitely. So helicopters have wind limitations for sure. I'm not a helicopter pilot. Maybe someone here is and can let us know. Are the max crosswind based on a component value? What do you mean component value? You mean regarding rudder, regarding thrust, etc., etc.? Yeah, I'm just going to do a little pattern. We're going to fly to Heathrow just to chat a little bit in flight as well. So Manflex 44 SAS runway auto thrust is blue. So I would actually go full down input. Can't do it right now, but I would normally do full input if you have more than 20 knots crosswind. V1, rotate. Pause rate climb, gear up. And In these conditions with very, very quickly changing wind components, so the wind could go up to 50 knots within 1,000 feet, you have huge climb rates. Just need to be ready for that. Thrust climb, autopilot 1. Yeah, somebody asked at some point, I don't know how long that was ago, but somebody asked whether or not pilots would be afraid of landing in these conditions. And so no, they don't have a fear of landing in these conditions. They have a good respect. So I would say I have a good amount of respect when it comes to these weather situations, but I'm not afraid of them. So I don't have a fear of them. And I think a good amount of respect is actually a good thing, because that means you won't get so complacent so quickly. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of viewers today on that stream are wondering, hey, why do these pilots actually start the approach if they hear that almost at least 50% of the aircraft, if not more, do a go around? Well, it's exactly for that reason, because the airport is open, the wind is within limits. Why shouldn't you try an approach? Right. Again, you may find a little window where the gusts aren't so extreme, and that way, yeah, you would be one of the lucky ones to get in. Right, Neil. So sorry, Neil. Red crosswind. The wind is 50 knots from the first. No, we don't. Oh, that was okay. That's what you meant. No, we don't. No, Neil. No. The tower only reports one wind value, so the tower reported wind is what we take. And that brings me to a good point. That's a good question as well. So the governing wind value is not the wind that you read off your nav display, right? That's not your governing wind, right? The governing wind is the tower reported wind. So legally, as long as the tower reported wind is within limits, even if your nav display shows something different, you're legal. All right. Doesn't mean that you can land, in the sense that you can't decide, or you shouldn't decide to go around maybe, but legally speaking, the tower reported wind is the one that is governing. Also in that regard, be aware that the wind stated on the ATIS or given you by the tower is normally a reference to magnetic north, while the wind on the METAR or TAFs are actually true north wind directions. So if you have some airports with larger variations between true north and magnetic north, you would have to take that into account. And that means things become a little bit more complicated in the pre-planning phase. Right? So if you look, for example, on your chart for Heathrow, and that's why I don't like these charts so much regarding Jefferson, because I'm not even sure. Does it even say the variation on here? I know it says on the airport chart, but anyway, let's go to the airport chart then. Right, so here we go. So the variation is actually 0 at the moment in Heathrow. So that means true north, so geometric North Pole equals the magnetic North Pole looking from London Heathrow. So there actually you don't have to consider anything regarding true north or magnetic north. But if you take, for example, let's take Victor Romeo Toronto. Let's have a look for, so Vancouver. Vancouver taxi airport. Yeah, Vancouver has a variation of 17 degrees east. Right, so when you do pre-planning and you look at your META wind or TAF wind, that is true north referenced and not magnetic north. But for landing, normally these airports, unless you have a huge variation where the runway heading would also be referenced to true north, or all of the radials from the VOR are referenced to true north, as long as that doesn't happen, there is a difference between the magnetic heading and the true north heading. So that's also interesting to remember. Oh yeah, and another interesting thing regarding operations. So let's say you land in 50 knots of wind. That doesn't mean you're going to have no problems on the ground, because there are actually limitations for operating passenger doors on A320. It's 65 knots. And cargo doors, it's actually 40 knots or 50 knots if the nose of the aircraft is into the wind, or the doors of the cargo doors are on the leeward side of the wind. Right, so that's something to consider as well. Right, here's the info on that. Oh, Neil, that's cool to know. So air bridges, wow, that's really cool to know. So Neil, so if the air bridges have a limitation of 54 knots at Heathrow, then if it's let's say gusting up 60 knots, I guess at some point, well, then the operations on the airport would stop. I'm pretty sure the same goes for normal stairs. So anything that you know, on apron position with stairs, there will be limitations as well. I don't know there's limitations. Some more questions coming in. Maestro, are you allowed to depart land when wind shear is reported in META or ATIS? How about if wind shear is reported for single runway and not all runways? Very good question, Maestro. So whatever the wind shear is concerned with, so if it's for your departing runway or landing runway, you would probably delay the departure, or if you have a feeling that it's more a nuisance warning maybe, or not so critical, then you would do a toga power taker, for example, right? Flap 1 departure, that sort of thing. But yeah, if I get a report, especially pilot report, wind shear, negative wind shear 25 knot on departure, I would actually delay departure. Brendan, yeah, exactly. And believe it or not, I've actually had that happen. I've had that happen. Not only because of wind, but also because of lightning. So we landed, and then a thunderstorm moved in. By the time we reached the gate, they had lightning alert, and so all operations on the ramp stopped. So yeah, passengers were not allowed to deboard. It can happen. It can happen. Hey, Solid Wings, how you doing? Yeah, doing well, thanks. We're just bracing for the big storm here tonight. Sergeant Scratch, hello. Hey, Black Box, in which situations would you choose a config 3 landing? Is strong winds a reason? Yes. Why is config 3 a good reason? Well, it's for wind shear recovery. We remember that when you do a wind shear recovery, you do not do gear and flap changes until you're out of the wind shear situation. So having a little bit less drag helps with the climb-up performance. However, another reason is the VFE speeds. Right, so when you're in config 4, your speed limit is 177 knots. If it's very gusty because of wind shear, you may be quicker in busting your limits. Right, so you have more margin in config 3. There you go all the way to 185 knots. So if you have an approach speed of today, like 122, Well, it's a bad kind of example. Let me say the 321, for example, we had an approach speed of 145. 145, then you get close to that first limit. While with flap 3, you have a larger buffer to VFE, or actually to the limit speed. Yeah, so guys, we'll be doing, in about an hour's time, we'll be doing the shared cockpit flight with our good friend SimCaesar in the US on the FlightJSim 737-200 on Pilot Edge. Also, we're looking very forward. So this first stream was pretty much a short announcement stream because of the weather situation over the UK today. But don't worry. So once we land and we go offline, at about 1900 UTC, so about an hour from now, we'll do another stream. Hey Alpha, how you doing? Yeah, so config 3 in windy conditions is definitely something you would consider. But isn't the fuel consumption higher if you perform a go-around when just maintaining your altitude? Yes, it is. But regarding fuel, you're already making sure that you always have your minimum fuel values. So when you look at your fuel amount, you always have a minimum fuel value that you need at your missed approach point, right? So that you get safely to your alternate airport. So that's something you don't really have to consider in order to perform the approach. I mean, of course, you consider so you can't start the approach if you don't have the fuel to do the approach. Then you have to divert anyways, or make a commitment. But in these conditions, you would never ever do a commitment unless you have a fire on board or smoke on board or something, an emergency that really requires you to get the aircraft on the ground. And that gives you, it's a question you will be able to answer anyway. So that was one question I was going to ask you guys. So let's say you go around and a flight attendant calls and says, hey, we've got smoke in the cabin. And then the tower says, well, we've got wind gusting 55, so crosswind component is 45 knots or something. Would you land? Umur, you would have to do the engine out procedure in that case. Or a different procedure. You cannot do the normal procedure in that case. Yeah, the missed approach procedure. So you have to do a different procedure. Yes, of course, right? You would, in this case, declare no. So Ayush, if that's my now, I don't know what other pilots would do, but for me, if I have smoke on board and I have an airport that's right below me, and no other options, or the next option would be like half an hour away, you bet I would land at Heathrow even at 45 knots crosswind. Right. So let's say I land and I start braking and the aircraft just drifts off slowly, and at low speed I roll into the grass next to the runway. Well, yeah, the aircraft may have a little bit of damage, but at least I can still deploy the chutes, have the fire brigade there, and get the passengers out. Right. So how about then you go around and the flight attendant calls, or the purser calls and says, hey captain, we've got a passenger, he's got signs of a heart attack, and the tower reports wind gusting 45. What do you do then? And I mean, it could happen, right? You've got a passenger that's very anxious, he's got fear of flying, you have that kind of very gusty approach, and they go around and that passenger has a heart attack. What do you do then? Do you land at 45 knots wind? Tough decision, isn't it? Yeah, Aviator 320. Yeah, that's one thing, right? The cabin crew could call out the doctor. The cabin crew is trained in first aid, so they can help. Right? So the question is, would you endanger all of the other passengers and to save one life, but potentially have the aircraft severely damaged and maybe some other passengers injured in that as a follow-up issue? Yeah, Captain Chaos, right? So it's a tough call. It's definitely a tough call, I can tell you that. But yes, you would have to find another option in this case. But here's the thing. Another commander may disagree with me here. And again, that's up to the commander. So if another commander says, no, 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 Captain Blackbox, you're wrong, I would say the risk is such and such. And so I am going to take that risk for that passenger. Well, then it's his call. Right? That is his call, not mine. If I'm the captain, if I'm the commander, then it's my call. So what happens if the passenger dies? There will be an investigation. And let's say the family starts suing the company, or maybe sue me. I'll go to court and I'll make my case. I'll get my lawyer and I'll make my case and I will explain the situation was such and such. And if I had done the landing in these conditions, I would have risked the lives of hundreds in order to save one. And then I would hope that the judge would see the same way and that I would not get prosecuted for it. But that's just one of those things as a commander that you have to live with. You make a decision, and someone may disagree and may take you to court over it. Well, I mean, so Brandon, we have our limitations. So we have 35 knots wind limitation. So in the simulator, that's what we simulate. But of course, there are scenarios where you're on final. And believe it or not, actually, my last simulated mission, we actually had that scenario. We were in the approach to Frankfurt. The wind was within limits. It was like 32, 33 knots wind component, crosswind component. And then at about 1,500 feet above the ground, gear down, flaps extended, we got a call from the cabin for the purser, simulator purser, saying that, yeah, there's a passenger that looks like he has a heart attack. Right? And also be aware, they will tell you it looks like he has a heart attack. It doesn't mean that he actually has a heart attack. He may just be, you know, under such a lot of stress, he just may have another issue, but not a heart attack. Right? So again, I'm not a doctor. I cannot judge that. Right? Yes, of course. So anything up to those limitations, you can hand fly it. That's not the issue. No. So that's all good. But if you then become unstable, all right, then you go around. Simple as that. And today we saw a lot of go-arounds in Heathrow. Aircraft just not being stable enough to make a safe landing. Or the wind component being over the limits. That can also happen. Why don't I have Heathrow in here on a list? That's a bit weird. Right, we'll take that. That's pretty much close by, isn't it? So if you're landing on a 270 and the wind is 280 at 40 knots, yes, I can. Yes. No, 10 degrees is a crosswind, Neil. So 10 degrees, that's already a crosswind component. 30, that's a weird thing. So 30 degrees angle is already half of the wind speed as a crosswind component. So let's say you hear gusts 50 and the angle between the runway heading and the wind component is 30 degrees. You already have 25 knots crosswind component. Now we're going to Heathrow, by the way, guys. We're going to Heathrow. 27 left. That's why I was wondering why we don't have Heathrow here. Yeah, oh yeah, good thing, Herr Fred, nice that you're saying that. That Mr. Devi, or whatever his name is, several times he said they have 3 tries, they have 3 goes. Right, 3rd time strike, out. Then you have to go and divert. No, that's not correct. No. At least not in our company, no. If you do a go around due to weather reasons, thank you, Geep. Right, so that's 1001 already. Wow, okay, that's quick changing. So the low pressure is moving away, so the pressure is rising again. So if we do the first go around due to weather, and today, for example, the strong wind, we would not start another approach unless the conditions indicate a higher likelihood of landing or a higher chance of landing than previously. Right? So we don't go around and say, all right, that was the first try, right? Maybe not lucky in the second try. Then we go around again. Oh, we got one more try, right? It's our lucky day. We played roulette, so we got 3 tries, and we try again. No, that's not how it works, no. Of course, first of all, you need the fuel to do that. Hey, Philip. And again, the second thing is, conditions have to be indicating such that a landing looks more justifiable, so more lucky or more likely to be successful than previously. Again, that may not be the same for all operators. I don't know. But yeah, no, that 3 try, then you have to go, no. If you have to fuel for 10 approaches, and every time you as the commander say, oh, I think the weather conditions have improved a little bit. I think we now have a better chance of landing. Don't you agree, my first officer? Yes, Captain, I agree. All right, then we try again. Go around, we try again, because conditions have improved, haven't they? Yes, Captain, they have. Right, try number 5, number 6, Look, again, as long as you have the fuel, you can do as many approaches as you like, right? So it's not 3 and then you have to go. I don't know, maybe that's the case with British Airways, I don't know. But for us, it's not. So, yeah, that's one of the things that I had to grin with today as well, so... But I don't want to bash Mr. Devi. You know, he's very knowledgeable. A lot of stuff he was talking about was actually correct. It's just a few comments I was like, nope, nope, that's not how we do it. 27 left. Let's have a look. No, that was like, you know, Avenger, that was like referring to a suggestive question, right? Like, what you shouldn't do. Like, I, as a captain, think the weather situation has improved. Don't you, think so as well, Mr. First Officer? Right? How is he going to say something different? So, the proper way, the proper CRM way would be, my dear First Officer, give me your thoughts about doing a second approach. That would be the proper way. Hey Giftswerk, how are you doing? Yeah. Also I'll break medium because I want to slow down quickly to have more effect with the, or quicker go into the range where I can use the tiller. Have more steering capability. So orbit medium is good. Yeah. Oh yeah, and now regarding the approach VLS, we can increase that up to 15 knots, and today I would do so. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So I would actually go down and increase the... Oh yeah, that's interesting as well. So on the A320, the V approach will always be 5 knots above VLS until the wind component, the headwind component, gets above 15 knots. Then the V approach will start changing. So if you have 5 knots wind, wind variable, whatever, nothing would change. If you have wind 15 knots headwind, nothing changes. However, if you have 16 knots of headwind, or 17, let's try 17, maybe it's just rounding up now. There we go. Then the approach speed starts changing. So today, with let's say 33 knots of wind, and now it's pretty much headwind, we already have 11 knots addition to VLS. Normally it would be 5. Now I can increase that even further to 15 knots above VLS, so I could go 139. And if the runway is long enough, which it is today, I would actually do that, because it will give me just a little bit more buffer to the VLS. Because if you have a very heavy aircraft, especially 321, if you get below, let's say, VLS plus 5, the elevator will become less effective, and you're in for a treat regarding hard landing and a potential, bounced landing and so on. So, yeah, be careful with that. So I would do the addition there. 50 knots, up to 50 knots, you can increase the speed there. Right, lock star. Some more questions. Yeah, Amsterdam. I think Amsterdam pretty much closed down, right? Or lots of airlines just stopped operation. Just canceled all the flights. Flying Adrian. Well, I mean, here in Bremen right now, like I said, I could feel the house shake. So Bremen right now reports wind 240, 34, gust 47, temporary gusting 55, and with rain. And prop 30, tempo 1900 UTC until 3 in the morning, gust 65. So I would not call that benign weather. I would say that's pretty heavy, heavy storm weather. Flaps 1, speeds check, flaps 1. Well, the only way an increased speed has an effect regarding wind is obviously you have more effectiveness on elevator, aileron, and rudder. But it's not that great. But again, it helps, or it may help. So Ayush, the limitation is your fuel. That's your first limitation, how many approaches you can do, and i.e. how many missed approaches you can fly. However, there may be some company SOP, and our company has that, where flaps 2, speed is checked, flaps 2,
2,500,
where you have to have a good reason to go for a second approach or third approach, i.e. for us, the weather has to be such that a landing is more likely than the first one. Herr Fred, we've pretty much secured everything, even our waste bins we've secured today. So yeah, all good. Where's my ad service? There it is. There's London Heathrow behind us. Oh yeah, and Millennium Dome. Mark told me part of the roof was actually damaged today of the Millennium Dome. So that's how strong the wind was today. Right, gears coming down. At this point, this afternoon, with having the tower reporting wind gusts up to 51. Actually, sorry, this way. I wanted to do a flap 3 landing, didn't we? So config 3. There we go. Flaps 3, final settings, speed is checked. So now we're going to put 150 actually as our approach speed. Landing checklist, EK landing, no blue. Hey, Kontoasu, guten Abend. Oh really? So TV? Oh wow. Okay, so that's. I hope nobody was injured. TV Revenger. I mean, that is really critical, isn't it? So cranes tipping over, trees falling over, roofs being blown off. That could quickly hurt some people. Yeah. Right, guys. So after landing, I'm just going to touch down, come to a stop, and then we'll end the stream because I'm going to be streaming again in about half an hour's time with the shared flight with SimCs. That should be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So completely raw data, VUR, and no GPS, no gimmicks with SIVA, and shared flight on Pilot Edge, Fresno to Reno, and then Reno to San Francisco. Should be very scenic. And should be very interesting also, and we're sure we're going to have some good laughs with some season.
1,000.
1,000 is checked, all completed. Wind right now, yeah, 30 knots headwind. So this kind of wind is something I would say is not even anything really to write home about. Alright, so manual flight. Bone King, yeah, I mean, hard landings, again, in these conditions, that can happen very quickly. Imagine you're flying along, you're just going into the flare, and suddenly the wind just drops by 10 knots, and you didn't have those additionals, and you drop below VLS. I promise you, you're going to have a hard landing. JD, nice try.
500.
Nice try. So, the camera, the guy with the camera, was he in this?
400.
No, he's in this field there, I think, with his van.
100 above.
Oh, look at that. Bit of downdraft.
300.
Also, what you'll find, so when you're flying in these conditions, your inputs, stick inputs,
Minimum.
have to be a lot more aggressive.
200.
A lot quicker, a lot more aggressive. Thrust change will be more aggressive. Again, all up. Careful with the sync rate. So all in order to make sure that you stay within the limits.
100. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Right, not a lot.
5.
There we go. Touchdown. Not. You know, don't mess about with trying to grease it, etc., etc. In these conditions, right, good braking action, manual brakes. These conditions, it's just about getting the aircraft safely down. Right. If you grease it in doing so, even better, then you've really earned your money. But right, as long as you get it down safely, everybody is well off. Aircraft is good. Oh yeah, I know, right? So new Heathrow scenery coming, absolutely. Right, yeah, we covered a lot of topics. Gave you guys a little bit of story time from my real-world experience. And yeah, so I had, of course, wind shear and with a diversion 2 years ago from Salzburg over to Linz. Things like this happen. As a pilot, especially short-range pilot, if you do a lot of flying, you will come across that. And it's not a matter of whether or not you like these conditions or not. You can't avoid them, right? You have your roster, and then you're going to fly, or you have to call in sick. If you think like, I'm not able to handle these conditions, well, then you need to call in sick. Right? Or call the ops center and say, hey, can you give me some other flights or something, right? Because I don't feel fit to fly that. Wow, this scenery is broken here. Good. Bobby Fuzzy, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. And again, if you're interested in some nice, old-fashioned 737-200 flying with a Fly JSIM, an X-plane, then come back in about half an hour's time. And then we'll join up with our good friend Sim Caesar. All right. Yeah, you'll be there. Fantastic. Mighty Moderators, thank you as always for the help. All right, guys. See you soon.